Good morning, everybody, and welcome to week number 11 of the semester. Um, so, just general notes. I saw that just about everybody took the Victorian exam, and everybody that took it either got an A or a B, so I'm quite pleased with the results there. You all did very well on that exam, and that always makes a teacher happy to see that. Um, for the postings, I'm a little bit behind on those. I spent last weekend in Atlanta taking a big comprehensive exam of my own, mainly on the stuff you got tested on last week on Victorian literature. Of course, mine was a much larger exam because I was covering a whole lot more readings and I was covering a lot more history and some of the scholarship that's out there. But I feel good about my results on that, and I guess that means that the school will let me continue teaching British literature in the future. So that was good news for me there. All right, this week we've got a lot. We're covering a lot in a very short week. We're going to start with the World War One poetry, and go through the slideshow on the World War One poetry and take a look at what World War One was. World War One was an event that the world had never seen before. Nobody had ever seen a war as destructive and with as many casualties and as many machines and things like that. It was actually not called World War One at the time because the war was so horrible that everybody thought, well, there'll never be another war at all, let alone a world war. Of course, nobody knew Hitler was coming, but that's a lesson for next week. So, World War One actually influenced the poetry, and when you look at the Rupert Brooke poem, titled "The Soldier," take a look at how patriotic it is, and take a look at how dying for one's country is such a great thing. But then take a look at the next two poets, Sassoon and Wilfred Owen, and you'll see that they have a totally different take on the war because they were actually fought in it, and they saw the horrors, and they saw the death, and they saw how dying for one's country is messy and is painful, and it's not any fun. There's no glory in it. Death is death, especially when you die at the hands of something like mustard gas. So compare those authors, Owen and Sassoon, to Brooke as you read the World War One poetry, and think about how the war affected that poetry, particularly for those that were actually serving in it. That leads us to the next group of authors, which are William Butler Yeats, T.S. Eliot, and Dylan Thomas. That's right. That's who the other one is. Modernism. Take a look at the modernism slideshow before you read the Yeats and the Eliot poems, because it's very important to know that modernism is a type of fractured literature. It also played with stream of consciousness. It also played with experimentation. It also played with high art. The modernists thought that all poetry and all novels should be high art. And this is different because they didn't think that their writings should appeal to the masses. And because of that, sometimes their readings are difficult. I actually chose the least difficult Eliot poem that I could think of. If I'd have assigned The Wasteland, you'd have hated me for it. And you probably would have traveled to Albany just to come to my office and tell me what a jerk I was for making you read The Wasteland. So I didn't make you read it. You're welcome. But still, his stream of consciousness and the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock and his random thoughts as they come in. And it's basically a lonely guy at a tea party full of pretty young women, worrying about his image and worrying about, admiring the hair on the backs of the women's arm and things like that. The T.S. Eliot, the William Butler Yeats one I chose is also a little simpler. It's I used to make my students read all three of the groups from Yeats. Yeats is probably one of the most important Irish poets ever, if not the most important. He's one of the most important. I only had you reading from his early work, The Isle of Innisfree, where he goes back to nature and he has this paradise island. And the Isle of Innisfree actually exists. If you go into my slideshow on Yeats, you'll see a picture of the Isle of Innisfree. It's now a tourist attraction because of that poem. I did not have you read Easter 1916, which was based on World War One, particularly an uprising in Ireland. And then I did not have you read Leda and the Swan, which is his late work, which is based on mythology. So Yeats, because he wrote for so long, had many different stages of his poetry. And I've got you reading his early work with Isle of Innisfree. Very short poem, but very enjoyable. And then finally, one of the classic poems of all time, Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night, by Dylan Thomas. That was written because his father was on his deathbed, and he wanted his father to fight to continue living, even though the allure of that good night might actually be very alluring, if you will. I don't know how better to say it. But the light, of course, is life, and the darkness, of course, is death. And he's fighting against the dying of the light. In other words, he wants his dad to fight and fight to live because he doesn't want him to go. So remember that as you read Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night. That is a poem that many people, even people who don't particularly like poetry, will say is one of their all-time favorite poems. So I hope you'll enjoy that one as well. So those are the readings for this week. I condensed it down to 2 postings. Last semester I had 4 postings. I had one on Eliot, one on Yeats, and one on Thomas. And I felt like that was just too much writing for you and too much grading for me, and it wasn't really fair for either one of us. So I've actually taken those last 3 authors and condensed them down into one posting, and you can choose which author you want to post on. So don't skip the other 2 authors, though, because remember, there will be a 20th century exam, and you'll need to know all 3 authors for that. So that's it for this week. I hope that you enjoyed this week's readings. I hope that you really pay attention to the World War I poetry and see the difference between the patriotic poetry and the poetry written by soldiers who actually served there. And if you have any questions, remember to email me, call me in my office hours, or visit my office if you're on campus. I like it when students, especially my online students, drop by so I can put a face to the name. I can say, so you're John Doe. Nice to meet you. Let's shake hands, that kind of thing. So come see me sometime, and we will talk later. All right, bye.